It's a rare honor to be here celebrating Tim Bevan and Eric Fellner, who have worked brilliantly behind the scenes for 30 years to bring us some of the best films of our time. Audiences in the United States have loved working title movies because of their originality, their humor, their intelligence, and if nothing else, because they feature that one special type of British accent that Americans are able to understand. Many of today's most significant filmmakers first walked onto the world stage when working title opened the door for them. In 1994, Richard Curtis appeared with the defining romantic comedy of our time, Four Weddings and a Funeral. This could be a long tribute. In 1996, the history of film was changed when an unusual movie called Fargo introduced mass audiences to the singular vision of Joel and Ethan Coen. In 2004, working title gave us the hilarious voices of Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg with the instant classic Shaun of the Dead. Go on, you clap for everything else. Working titles films have attained a high standard of quality and global reach, made more remarkable by the modest size of the company. But from the beginning, Tim Bevan and Eric Fellner have embodied the spirit of creativity, the ability to turn imagination into reality. They have shown us that truly great works of cinema are driven not by big spending, but by big ideas. They probably find all of this, I know they find all of this incredibly embarrassing. Very awkward, they don't really want to be here, they're very grateful, but it's very embarrassing for them. If asked, they would say simply that, sure, we've made a few films, sure. Around 100 films, in fact, plus award-winning television series and a Broadway smash in Billy Elliot. All right, fine, okay, they'd say. Around this point, they probably asked whether it was really necessary for me to mention those films had grossed around $6 billion worldwide. Where is this going, Luke? They would mumble, looking into their laps sheepishly. Can't we talk about something else? Nobody needs to be bothered with a little thing like that, etc., etc. Perhaps this modesty and discipline has been part of their success, letting the work speak for itself. I'm pretty sure there is much more to it, though, and I'm thrilled that they've agreed to join us this evening with a few of their friends to tell us more about the legendary working title, and, as they might put it, a few little films we made. Please take a look at some of these little films. You might just remember a few. It gives me exceptional pride and great joy to bring to the stage Raj Roy, the moderator, and the great, inimitable Tim Bevan and Eric Fellner.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. This celebration, which we'll try not to make too embarrassing, but I have to say, watching that reel and recalling all of these tremendous films, what you've done for this industry, for the film industry, is nothing short of heroic, and I think it's our right here in the Hamptons to celebrate heroic work, and we hope to get some of the mystery behind that heroic work out to this audience. But with every great hero, there's a backstory, and that's kind of where I'd like to begin. I'll try and set the stage from our vantage point across the pond. I'll lay it out. You can tell me it's a bunch of rubbish and tell us what actually happened. But from what I can tell, in the 80s, when you really started getting involved in moving image, and it was in different ways, in the UK, at least from our point of view here, British film was basically Monty Python and Merchant Ivory. Pop music, punk music, was thriving in the UK. And there was kind of an underground cauldron of creativity around the moving image. But mainstream cinema coming out of Britain was something that was rather foreign. And you guys helped change that, which is what we'll talk about today. But I'd just like to get a snapshot from you of what that period when you really started thinking about producing motion pictures in the 80s was about. And we can start with music, because I actually think that's the cool
you're
part.
looking at me, so I'll start. Desperation, probably. A need and a desire to try and express oneself in some way or another. I mean, I can talk for me. Tim, we were actually competitors in, when was it? In the early 80s. I know we don't look old enough, but amazingly we were working then. Yeah, I just wanted to get things done, make things happen creatively, you know, in music, in film, and you know, it was an exciting time. It actually was, you know, punk had long gone, early 80s. We were in the world of the new romantics, which was a fashion era I think we all want to forget. I don't have any pictures of Tim in his new romantic clothes, but I'm sure they exist somewhere. Yeah, so it was just a desire to make things happen.
And who were you working with at that time?
As well, we were both running music video companies, and I think we had a similar ambition, which was to move through music videos to try and produce films. And there's a sort of perfect storm going on in many ways, because the music video world had enabled a lot of young people to get into making films who might not have otherwise been doing so. A company called Channel 4 had just started in Britain, which I benefited from much better than you did, in actual fact, I think, didn't I? But they were working with independent filmmakers.
I read a statistic, which you can tell me is wrong, but as they often are, but that from 1989, investment in British production by the government went from £104 million to 1996, when it was £741 million. And I have to think, in fact, I'm quite sure you had a great deal to do with that, and perhaps one picture in particular, coming in the early 90s, changed ideas about investment in Britain.
Is Four Weddings the anonymous film? Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
It was, I mean, it did many things for many people. For Tim and I, it gave us the opportunity to believe that you can make commercial films that will work on a global basis out of the UK. It was proof that that was the case. It also showed us how direct distribution, if you were working with distributors on a global basis, you actually had more control in how to market your film, how to release your film, when to date your film, and ultimately, money comes back to the people that have made the movie. So those were two giant lessons that we took from it, and there may be other things.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing was that a non-American English language film could go out and do $250 million around the world, and that was like, wow, that's great.
And it's how many people? I mean, the legend is it's 30 people that do all this work.
Something like that.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, we have an office in London, office in LA. It's about 37, 38 people, and we try to make 3 to 4 films a year. But the really important people are the directors and the writers who don't work for us on a regular basis, and well, sometimes work for us on a regular basis, but aren't
actually, the really important person is in the audience. We better give her a name check, I think.
Who's that?
I don't know. Yeah.
Eliza Chaser.
No, one of the yeah. One of the things we've been very fortunate with is that we've had, and it's very, very unusual in the movie business, we've had the same key group of people work with us pretty much all the way through, and I think that's given us an enormous stability and ability to do the things that we've able to do. And Liza runs the LA side of our business, and Angela Morrison, and up till recently a woman named Deborah Hayward in the UK.
So we're lucky enough to meet with Ron Meyer and his team, who were running Universal at the time, and this was in 99 or 98?
98, yeah.
98. And then that was the second most critical relationship we've had, and we've been working with Ron and his team to now, which is 15 years. And 50 of those 100 movies we've made with Universal.
And that relationship seems to dispel a lot of myths about the abilities of smart producers to work with big studios, because you've had such a fruitful relationship, it would seem, with your partners at Universal.
Yeah, amazing. No, they've given us creative autonomy, which is an amazing thing to have. And I think they've sort of always accepted that we are a bit of an anomaly because we're based out of London, and we're sort of an addendum, if you like, to everything else that the studio does. And very luckily for us is we were part of the Four Weddings success, and then all of the subsequent films that did pretty well in the 90s. Is we were part of this thing of the foreign revenues basically being greater than the US domestic revenues, which has subsequently become a big trend in the movie business. And the growth in film is not necessarily here in America, but all around the world. And we benefited from that hugely through the 90s, and that all of the pictures we did were making like 75% of their revenue out of foreign.
Yeah, we've heard a lot about that. That's fascinating, though, that you guys have been on that cusp, or really. Yeah,
there's something about an English commercial film seems to travel very well, internationally, often better than to America. So yeah, we've been on the good side of that.
So I do want to start diving into the creative side and talking about a few of your films with two of the directors that you've worked with often here. But before I bring them out, I want to give you the opportunity to speak freely without them sitting right next to you. Every parent loves all their children equally. But I just wondered if there are some projects, some partners, you have an incredible stable of directors, writers, actors that you work with. Obviously, we'd love to know any of the terror situations, but also some of the passion projects and just some of the moments that you would say maybe they're your favorite kid in some way.
I think, I mean, with all of the people, we're very lucky in that we've had a number of creative relationships that have lasted over many movies, and that collaboration is something that just grows. And I think both Eric and I, what we kind of like to do is to agree with the director or the creative people what the size of the box is that one's trying to work to. That's the most important thing, is that we all set out trying to make the same movie at the same price. And then our job is to make sure that that box is kind of protected through the journey, and the director's job is to stay in the box. And that's the process of, and when they come out of the box, it can be all right to bang them on the head at that point.
Any anecdotes about that? Any headbanging you want to? You
no,
can just you could leave the names off.
No. But suffice to say, on occasion that does occur. But actually, we've been remarkably lucky because these directors and big creative relationships, they've become the backbone of our company. They've become good friends, and they happen to have, a number of them happen to have been, Edgar and Richard and Joe Wright and Paul Greengrass and Joel and Ethan. They're sort of the movie directors of this generation as well. So we've been very fortunate in that respect.
So you pretty much dodged my question very elegantly.
He could answer it.
I'll put a case study there. So obviously, when you're working at a bigger scale, or it would seem obvious that when you're working at a much bigger scale than, say, a $30 or $40 million film, say something like Les Miserables, which is a big production, that the dynamics of working as collaborators as producers, collaborators with directors, actors, international actors, and also, this is a musical. That must have been a challenge. Can you just talk to us a little bit about working on what ended? It ended happily, obviously. The movie was a huge global success, won Oscars. But was it easy?
No, I think there's a number of films coming out this year that you can just see the blood, sweat, and tears, and that's why they're brilliant. And I think, making a film is a very, very hard thing to do, and a lot of people in this room have made films. It's not an easy thing to do. So, of course, one tries to make the whole process as pleasurable and painless as possible, but ultimately, you're trying to put an awful lot of creativity together with an enormous amount of restrictions, which are time and money, and cram them together to try and come up with genius. And that equation is stressful and complicated. So in terms of Les Miserables, we were very lucky. We had Cameron Mackintosh's amazing production as the ground floor. But we knew that at the price we were making the film, the fans of that show were not enough to make the film a success. So we had to break out and discover a whole new audience for it, and at the same time keep the fans satisfied. So you're walking a fine line there.
Well, I want to bring out two of your great collaborators to talk a little bit more about producing these great visions. Please welcome Richard Curtis and Edgar Wright. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for being a part of this. So I'll just lead it off with a first-time impression. So if you can recall the first time you met these two, and if there was anything memorable or distinctly unmemorable about that occurrence.
Well, I think key fact is annoyingly handsome. That was the thing. Like you, as well. I'm thinking, therefore, probably not good at his job. That was the first conclusion. No, I mean, I worked with Tim first on The Tall Guy. And I've got so much to say about our relationship. The thing I particularly remember about that one was Tim got the money. And I remember him coming in and saying, "We've got the money for the film." And I said to them, what did they think of the script then? And Tim said, "Oh, yeah, no, actually the script didn't come up in the conversation." It turned out that they'd really just bought Rowan Atkinson on ITV for an hour and a half, and it didn't matter what load of old rubbish it was. I don't know they'd even read it. But right from the start, the extraordinary thing, which I've had with both of them all the way through, is a kind of unargumentative trust, sensible advice, great patience. But on that film, it was my first film. I wanted Mel Smith to direct it, who hadn't directed a film before. We did the screen tests. We liked Emma Thompson more than anyone by miles. She'd never been in a film before. I think it'd be interesting for you to look at whose first films they've done. Daniel's first film was Laundrette, wasn't it? Jeff was the most peculiar piece of casting in that film. So it was a sense of kind of trust, as though there wasn't a hierarchy between us, which is very important, I think.
Edgar?
I think I was a bit nervous when I met Eric the first time, because by the time I did Shaun of the Dead, I was trying to get it off the ground. They were already, I'm going to use the word juggernaut, because it was after Four Weddings, after Notting Hill, after Bridget Jones, and in fact they're in the offices above my agent. So it sort of seemed, and I wanted to make films from a very early age, and I'd done some very small independent stuff, and then done a lot of TV. So, going kind of to working title is like going to the big leagues in London, or in the UK, or as big as it gets. So I remember being quite nervous, and I think they turned my movie into something that, if it had been made by one of those other companies, would have played on 10 screens, even if it got good reviews and disappeared. But the great thing that they do is that they're not afraid of making populist films. And so my movie was then in British cinemas as a wide release. And so without that, and that kind of vote of confidence behind it, I wouldn't be sitting here,
Actually, that's one thing I wanted to say about what we wanted to say about the directors. If Working Title's done anything, I think it's enabled a group of very good British directors to lead their careers in Britain. And when Eric and I first started, as people would direct a film in England and then head out to Hollywood pretty much straight away, because there wasn't anyone who could support their movies in the UK. And actually, both Richard and Edgar and Danny Boyle, not with us, but in the 90s, chose to stay and to make films in Britain, which has been and that is, I think, what the biggest thing that Working Title's achieved, actually.
We were just talking about this outside, just saying there's a whole alternative history of British movie which doesn't have Hitchcock making all his movies in America, doesn't have John Schlesinger making movies in America, and it still happens. Until Skyfall, there'd never been an English actor in a Sam Mendes film, just charging off there to make American movies. And I think one of the great things about Working Title is we felt we can make exactly the movies we want to make in the right accents.
So why didn't you cast a brilliant British actor who could pull off a very easy American accent, rather than actually hiring an American?
In Bridget?
In any of them?
In any of them?
No, in any of them.
Well, if the films feel... Well, first of all, there's a creative reason. And, I have to defer to the writer of Four Weddings on that one. But the secondary reason is there is a commercial aspect to it. If you want to have a film that can play globally, it helps if you spread, you know, the load, so to speak. So to have an American actress or an American actor in a film can often help if there isn't a big enough star in the UK who can do it. With Renée in Bridget, she was the best person for the job. There was no question about nationality. And who was the third one you were talking about?
Julia Roberts.
Yeah, you'd have to ask him that one.
Well, Julia was just because the only English movie star at that moment was Emma Thompson, and she was like Hugh's best friend, and so it would have been pathetically unconvincing. I mean, we wondered if it should be an Australian or something, but the point of that movie was, in fact, that it should be a huge American star. And one of the great things, I mean, and it's shared, the credit is shared between Universal and Tim and Eric, is that they don't argue about, I mean, they might sometimes make suggestions, but in that movie, actually, we started off determined not to cast Hugh Grant. That was the plan, because I thought it was going to be a much more interesting movie if, as it were, Julia Roberts fell in love with someone who no one in the movies had ever seen before. But we auditioned about 10 ghastly young actors and lost the will to live and sent the film to Hugh. But it has been remarkable over the years how the pressure that we have not had. My new movie stars this young chap called Donald Gleason, and it was never, when we met Donna, she didn't say, you just can't do that. It's got to be someone who people know, or at least whose name people can pronounce. But time and time again, the sort of magical relationship that we have with Working Title and that Working Title have with Universal means that you're allowed to do the thing that you believe is right. I remember walking out of a meeting with Stacey Snider, and she said, you know, if you cut the naked people out of Love Actually, we will make $20 million more. And I said, no. And she said, fine. And that was the end of that.
No, but look, what you're describing is seems like a kind of unbelievable ability to balance an appreciation for artistry and a non-allergy to commercially viable pictures, which we tend to think are not compatible, right? You have to be, you know, really on one side or the other of the equation. Either you make art films or you make commercial films, and there's no way to do both. But you've disproved that time and time again.
Yeah, I think this is part of the origins thing, because when Eric and I were doing music videos, we started to go to LA a lot. And right from the beginning of Working Title, we would come to America a lot. And a lot of British producers and people who make films are sort of fearful of Hollywood, and we always embraced it because we wanted to get it. We realized that the money was there, the distribution was there, the agencies were there, and all the rest of it. But we embraced it, but we also wanted to make British films, and it's been fantastic, the relationship with Universal, because they've supported us in that, and we have become a really good interface, if you like, between Hollywood and a lot of non-American talent, I think.
And there was never pressure to not take a chance, like on a new vision, a new Edgar Wright or.
No, I mean, it's interesting, this conversation, because it may not be interesting for you, but it's interesting for me, in that it's focusing on it's like a weird trust circle where, you know, the studio are kind of doing something that they may not normally want to do, but are enjoying it, I hope. Some of them are here, and having some success by doing it, but it's not an obvious thing for them to be doing. We're, you know, staying in England, which isn't an obvious thing to do. You know, it's a very interesting dynamic, the way the whole thing works, and it's, you know, there's a thin line that holds it all together. But whilst audiences like this come to festivals like this and want to see films like the ones that are being screened here, it will continue to work. And hopefully, you know, when people say to me, what connects all the Working Title films, I say story and character. You know, we start from story and character. We like writers and directors to create things from the ground up rather than concept down. Long may that tradition exist. In terms of whether they're art or commerce, I actually don't agree with you. I think you do have to decide, are you making a specialist film or a commercial film from day one? Because otherwise you get into all sorts of trouble if you make a $40, $50 million movie for a limited audience, or you take a great concept and you don't give it enough money for it to pop. You know, I do think you've got to be very clear from the beginning.
Richard, we talked a little bit yesterday when we met about time. Yes. And not about your film about time, but about working titles' ability to grant filmmakers time. And maybe both Edgar and you could speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, this is a particular thing. I mean, just about Tim and Eric, which is just when you're thinking what do producers do and how can producers really help the people they're working with. And almost every single one of my films has been in some kind of crisis. And, I mean, Four Weddings particularly, we lost half the money, didn't we? Well, first the movie was going to be made, then we lost half the money and it got delayed by 6 months, and Tim just said, wait. And then literally days before the movie started, we got a message that we'd lost even more of the money. And I know that we all had to take half our wages, didn't we, just a few weeks beforehand. Mike Newell, who's fairly red of face anyway, purple of face, that day. And so in that case, they just waited patiently. And then on Bridget, the film, when we first tested it, just didn't work at all, did it? There was something completely wrong, and I could tell you how we solved it, but it took 6 months to solve. And Eric just kept saying, I know the film will be fine, and you just go on editing, and you edit in different rooms, and you do reshoots, which we didn't actually do in the end. We found a way through another way. But we just held on, kept patience, kept faith, because there would have been a way of saying, look, let's just get the movie out, accept that we failed. It's a famous name. We'll make enough money. Love Actually, I had suddenly got another job to do, so I finished shooting the movie. They waited for 3 months to me to start editing it, and then the editing was another catastrophe because the film didn't really work as it was, and any scene could go after any other scene because there were, 10 stories, so it was like playing three-dimensional chess trying to edit that movie. And again, they waited and waited, and we had a complicated relationship between me and the director of Notting Hill, and I think most people who want to get on with things would have said, well, okay, well, you're in charge now, or you're in charge now. And Eric just kept saying, well, Richard, you just do 2 weeks of what you want to do, and then Roger, you just do 2 weeks of what you want to do, and then eventually it'll all come. And this kind of, neither of you have ever raised your voice at me once during all the years, and there are other producers who only speak in shouting. But I think this idea of really keeping faith when things are in trouble and trusting that you've made a good choice in the first place is absolutely, it's part of the same trust thing, but it's a crucial element of how many of the films have got through fine. Do they rush you?
No, no, I think,
slow,
I think for me, like the great thing has been able to make films, going back to what you said about going to Hollywood and stuff, is that it doesn't, you realize when you work with working title that you're already working with a major because they're already kind of linked with Universal. And when you go to kind of Los Angeles and think, well, I could make, you guys are already making big films. So it's actually something where, I think before that, there was always that thing of like a lot of great British directors went straight to kind of Hollywood on their second film and sometimes never heard of again or never made good on that promise because they were immediately eaten by the machine. And I think I definitely did Hot Fuzz was my second film, which I, made as British as I could possibly be. Kind of like, but buoyed by the fact that I'd made Shaun of the Dead and then been all around the States and traveled to countries I'd never been to and shown it. And, it always felt like an enormous point of pride to take a British film. I remember watching Shaun of the Dead in Detroit and watching North London on the big screen and thinking, this is amazing. This is so strange. And I felt so sort of proud of it. And so that's been a thing to keep returning to that, is that I would like to, because that you're going to make a British film that people are going to see, and I think sort of in the more independent circuit, that's not necessarily the case, or you could, even something very celebrated could not reach many eyes. You know, it's just, I'm very loyal, and like I'll always be back, and I think it's a testament to, you know, the Coen Brothers have done like sort of movies with other people, but they've always come back to working title, and there's a reason for that, you know?
The Coen Brothers, and I do feel like we should talk a little bit about them, especially since they're beloved here and they're American boys. I think I read a quote somewhere where Raising Arizona was an early inspiration to you, Edgar.
It is. It's my favorite film.
There you
Not
go.
working title one. I'd say Fargo is my favorite film for tonight.
Yeah. But maybe you could just elaborate a little bit on
so
working
very briefly, I mean, we're blessed to have a relationship with John and Ethan. They make films with many producers. We've been fortunate enough to do 7 with them, which I think is half of their output. And hopefully we will do more in the future. They're like these guys. You know, I said earlier, most movies are painful in some way or another. For us, just because they take most of the pain, those movies are very, very easy for us. Because yeah, they're so, you know, because they're writer directors, they have every aspect of it in their head the minute they hit the set, and are able to and work with the same people all over again and again and again. It's a very impressive setup.
So there's a tradition at the Hamptons that usually happens behind closed doors, and since Working Title is such a preeminent global company, we thought it was more appropriate to do a panel discussion in front of an audience. But it happens sometimes that these turn into more of a roast than a toast. So I want to give our directors the opportunity. If you, I mean, are these guys as flawless as they appear? Richard, come on, you've got to have a story.
I was told this was a non-swearing audience.
That was a frickin' lie.
So I'll tell you one story, but I'll change one of the words. I remember Tim and Eric were receiving an award from BAFTA, much the same as this situation, and they showed a film slightly like the one before, and I was so chuffed because my films were highly featured, and I felt proud as it shot through, and I could see the whole of my life's work up there on the screen, as well as all the other extraordinary things that Tim and Eric had done. And when the 2.5 minutes were over, Tim, who was sitting behind me, leaned over and whispered to me, "Oh, thank God for Cate Blanchett, because otherwise it's just middle-of-the-road shit, isn't it?" And I thought, that's my whole life that he's talking about. Of course, I agreed, obviously, enthusiastically. So they're not always perfectly tactful.
I do want to give you both, Tim and Eric, an opportunity, and Richard and Edgar, you should feel free to chime in as well. There's been several festivals around this country this year, perhaps in the UK as well. I think Steven Soderbergh, Steven Spielberg have chimed in on the state of the industry. And alternatively, you know, in different ways, the doom and gloom scenarios that we're facing. Somehow I feel like we're sitting in this ray of sunshine, which is appropriate at the Hamptons Film Festival, where there's just optimism on this stage. Is there anything else you would add to the discussion about the state of where we are and encouragement or discouragement for folks trying to make it in this industry at this point?
Well, I think the most important relationship is between us and you guys out there. And as long as people continue to go and see these sorts of films and pay in cinemas and all the rest of it to go and see them, then we stand a chance, because it is definitely a lot more difficult than it was, and that's nobody's fault. It's just the way that the industry's moving, and these sorts of films are slightly under threat from television and from the way the movie business is evolving. But as Eric said, I think this season of Oscar candidate movies is going to toss up 10, 15, 20 fantastic films, and I'm sure many people will go and see them, and there's a lot of encouragement to be drawn from that.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is whenever you start setting trends, they get broken. or talking about trends, they get broken. In terms of the industry itself, if we were to dare to make a comment, because we are but lowly producers, maybe because we're English we can comment from afar, is, we live in a digital age. And if our industry doesn't fully recognize it and start dealing with the window issue, then we're going to have major problems. So I do think that that is a discussion that needs to be more prevalent on every single level, from, because it's going to affect actors, writers, directors, producers, distributors, studios, independents, everybody. So, yeah, I think that is a big issue we're all staring at, and some of us are putting our head in the sand.
Other than please run out and make a film with working title, any other comments on the state of the industry or where people should look for new direction?
I don't know. I'm just so optimistic because I keep seeing films that I adore, and I would, just encourage film critics to realize that we're living in a golden age. There's this bizarre thing that almost every single person thinks that the 10 best films ever made were, coincidentally, films they saw between the age of 17 and 23. And therefore, when a film critic's 70, there are no color films in that list of films. I just keep seeing films which I think something must be going right when extraordinary films are still being made all the time. So I'm very optimistic, and my experience of the terrifying studio system is benign. I've just had lunch with Ron Mayer, and who's been an extraordinary friend through a decade, and we just talked about my daughter, not about any kind of strong-arming me into doing any more work. And I think they're really good, civilized people. The thing that I'm most excited about, oddly enough, in the film industry is an extraordinary generation of young actresses in America. I don't know whether or not you've noticed this, but there are about 10 geniuses at work between, we've been talking about that, from Brie Larson to Kristen Stewart to Emma Stone to Jennifer Lawrence. I've never known a period like it where they're both the Fanning girls, Chloe Moretz. It's an amazing time, and you just have to hope that, in fact, people are brave, both with the kind of movies they make, and there are extraordinary movies still to be made, and then, indeed, as you say, to be stolen by my daughter online.
I think just to add, I think it's, like Richard said, it's, there's definitely things where you can sort of spell like a seeming sort of downturn in quality, or if not that, just the sort of the same kind of movies. Especially I think what kind of happens is that it goes in waves. You go through like a summer where you start to see the same movie every week, and then come October, you say, oh, there are good movies. It's but I think it's just if the calendar gets more diverse. I think that the main thing is that, people do want, smart movies and commercial movies are not mutually exclusive. And, Gravity proves that last weekend, that people want to go and see a great, intelligent movie. In terms of me, I always just feel fortunate making a movie full stop, and I sort of tend to treat, as Eric knows, I tend to treat every movie like it's my last, in terms of I just want to, make sure it's absolutely perfect and stuff. And so, I just, from my point of view, I never ever get blasé about the future and stuff. I always want to kind of just do the best job I can, because I grew up being a film fan. I want to keep making films, and when the sort of the business sometimes looks like it's in trouble, you think, then you just feel fortunate. I get to put something on screen, and this is a gift. So, but I think it's not a bleak future. I think there's great stuff out there, and I think as long as it's the films in the middle that have to be supported. There's always going to be great low-budget independent films. There's always going to be massive studio tentpoles, and it's the ones in the middle that need the love.
You guys are very good at those, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, our job with you is to make them great, and if we can make them great, then yeah, I think people will still come, definitely.
Well, we're definitely here to celebrate the greatness that you've brought to the screen and to festivals around the world like this. And it's my great pleasure to introduce the Executive Director of the Hamptons International Film Festival, Anne Chesson.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. First, I'd like to thank our beloved Raj Roy for moderating the panel, our former artistic director. We're very happy to have you back. And I'd also like to truly thank Luke Parker-Bowles and Harleen Frears for producing this event and getting these amazing people to come to our festival. But of course, we're here to talk about Eric and Tim. And as we all know, they've embodied the essence of creativity, the ability to bring thought into being. And they've shown us that truly great works of cinema are driven not by spending, but by big ideas. And they understand how to make that a reality. So it's staggering to think of how many films we've not had the pleasure to see had they not made them. And thankfully, they keep bringing these films to us. So on behalf of the Hamptons International Film Festival and the British Academy of Film and Television Arts, it is with great pleasure that we present the Golden Starfish Award for Lifetime Achievement to Tim, Bevan, and Eric Fellner. Thank you, everybody. Good night.